Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Games I've Wanted to Play, the series in which I delve into the treasure chest that is video games history and pick out and talk about a game that I've always wanted to play. For today's title, we're going to go all the way back to that year that Prince warned us about, 1999. It was a year in which Eiffel 65 told us just how blue they were, Lou Bega released Mambo No. 5, and South Park's Chef wanted us to do something unspeakable to his chocolate salty balls. Maybe Prince was right to warn us all along. In the video game world, we saw the release of Gran Turismo 2, Silent Hill, the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, some little title called Siphon Filter, which we might have spoken about in another video. Do go check it out after this one. And of course, the subject of today's video, Reflections, Driver. Driver was developed by the Newcastle-based Reflections, and it sees you taking on the role of John Tanner. He's a former racing driver turned undercover cop, and he's working to move through the ranks of a criminal organisation in order to uncover what their shady goals are. It boasts 4 cities: the sun-drenched beaches of Miami, the hilly landscapes of San Francisco, the urban sprawl that is Los Angeles, and the bustling metropolis that never sleeps that is New York. This is across its main story and additional game modes, such as a free roam mode, checkpoint races, pursuit and getaway modes, just to name a few. Now, the emphasis of the game is on cinematic car chases, trying to capture the essence of 70s and 80s car films, and as such it also boasts a film director, which allows you to view saved replays and mess about with the cameras while watching them back. So you get a hell of a lot of content here. Now, as a kid, I never saw any of this content, because all I had was a demo which featured what has become the now infamous parking garage tutorial level. This is the opening level of the undercover mode, and it challenges you to perform a number of manoeuvres in a specific time limit in order to move forward. Now, did I manage to do that? Did I balls? So I'm hoping this time around I can actually manage to get past that bit and see what lays beyond. Now, Driver as a series has had its share of ups and downs. Driver 2 kind of took us outside of the vehicles, allowed us to move around, and got a mixed reception. Driver 3 is seen as a very particular low point of the series, but I personally thought that the last title in the Driver franchise, which was Driver San Francisco, was absolutely fantastic. So I'm very intrigued to go back to see where it all began, how it holds up today, and what it's like. So let's get on and see what my expectations for this game are. Expectations. I'm not entirely sure what to think about this one. As mentioned, I had the demo as a kid, found that parking garage level incredibly hard, and it's always been something that I thought about when thinking about the franchise. It's very infamous. It always pops up in a number of publications as being the sort of, the tutorial level that people play and quit the game before it even starts. The tutorial level that's harder than the game itself. It's very infamous, and as such, I think my perception of the game's difficulty could be potentially skewed by that. I'm kind of expecting this to be a very enjoyable game. People who played it loved it, have very fond memories of it, but maybe because of my memories of it and because of the way other publications have spoken about it, I'm expecting it to be on the higher end of the difficulty spectrum. Now, this could be down to, like I said, my perception of it, but I'm expecting it to have some quite strict time limits in what you have to do. I'm thinking the chase mechanics could be quite difficult. But, having said that, I'm expecting the driving mechanics to be really solid and tight. I'm expecting it to feel quite cinematic. In terms of anything else, the story and such, expecting it to be serviceable, nothing to write home about. So, I'm expecting the game to be difficult. I'm expecting to have strict time limits, maybe the police chase to be quite hard at times, but I'm expecting it to be quite fun to learn. I'm expecting to have a lot of fun learning the cities and their layouts, and it to be a very solid experience. After all, this is a much revered game, so I'm not expecting to jump into this and it be completely awful, but I'm expecting it to be difficult and have quite a hard time with it, but to come out of it thinking, yeah, that was quite good. But let's have a look at the game itself and see how I felt after playing the first 30 minutes of it. Surprisingly, it didn't take me all 30 minutes to do the parking lot mission. It took me about 10 minutes instead. It wasn't as difficult as I expected it to be. It was difficult, don't get me wrong, but over the years, and because of the aforementioned various publications, it had been built up and built up. It was still tricky. I would say, out of all the manoeuvres you have to do, the reverse 180, definitely the hardest one to pull off. And I also found the slalom to be quite fiddly as well. I knew what I needed to do for it, but I also kind of struggled to pull it off at times. It was quite a strange one. Like I say, it wasn't as difficult as I'd built it up to be. It might have seemed more frustrating at times, might have been more frustrating due to the restarts and the length of time it would take to restart, which, this is where save states came in handy. I was able to pop in a save state at the start of it. Then, when I knew I'd fail, was just able to hit the load state quite quickly and immediately go back. There was no need for me to wait for it to load in like a 30-second cycle or wait for me to fail to go back to. So that was quite a big bonus to it. And as I moved on to the first main mission of the game, that was an absolute cakewalk. That was so easy. It was just drive to this point. You didn't even use any maneuvers at all. So it was kind of, it was quite funny to see, this barrier, this difficult barrier to entry that was the opening parking lot bit, and then the first actual mission just be so simple. So once you do that, you go into sort of a main hub where you pick your missions. I quite liked that the main hub for picking missions was set in Tanner's apartment. It gave the game quite a unique and nice feel to it. As you pan around, you've got select a mission, exit, save your game. There's a few other options there, and it was cool. You pick your missions by answering an answer phone, and it's like you can scroll to a new mission and play the message and accept the mission from there. I'll go into probably that later on as I experience it a little bit more. Miami itself seemed like a really cool setting. It looked archaic compared to what we have now, but I can imagine being seriously blown away by this as a kid. It's a full 3D city with pedestrians and traffic and, being able to traverse from one side to the other. It's quite big. My first few encounters of the law around the city, I encountered them like twice going around. In one instance, they were super easy to lose. In the other one, it felt like they were completely stuck onto me like glue. There wasn't a real in-between there. Also, it was a little bit cheap and frustrating at times the way they could just spawn in front of you. But for the opening mission or two, wasn't too bad. Again, I expect maybe as I play the game more, it might come into play a bit more. Something else I noticed that was quite neat is that when you do have them chasing after you on the faster roads, they set up little roadblocks, which is a really neat little touch. It sort of gives you something to think about and avoid. So those are my initial thoughts on the game, and let's see how I get on with the rest of it, shall we? So I'm glad to say I've actually completed it now. It took a few days, maybe an hour a night. It took me about 5 to 6 hours in total. The undercover mode was actually really cool. As I expected, the story was fine. It was nothing amazing, nothing to write home about, and it perhaps wasn't helped by the fact that the cutscenes felt a little awkwardly placed at times, and also the volume of the cutscenes versus the main game meant I had to keep adjusting things, couldn't quite hear it properly. That could have been a me problem, could have been an emulation issue, but I just found some of the scenes to be quite awkwardly placed. The characters took a while to speak and get going, but this is a PS1 game. They were still finding their feet with this sort of stuff. It's kind of to be expected. It was more than what you might get from other PS1 games, put it that way. Like I say, undercover mode was really neat though. I did like the fact that there were various mission strands you could pick. Going back to what I mentioned in my initial impressions, you get an answer phone. You can have like 3 to 4 messages on that answer phone, each one pertaining to a mission strand. So there's replayability here. You can go back and play through the story again and have a bit of a different experience, play through different missions and just have a different path. Just really, really cool. For the time, having different mission paths, something really neat, something quite unique at that time. And there was a good variety of missions. Obviously, they all range around you, being in a car and driving to point A and B or whatever, but as a standard sort of drive quickly to point A, smash into a few shops, ram vehicles off the road, chase a vehicle down, or just escape a good old-fashioned police chase. Now, speaking of the police, similar to what I said in my first impressions, they could be incredibly tough or they could be incredibly easy, not much in between. One of the more irritating moments was on one particular mission in New York. You have to drive to an area that is a bit of a dead end, and I had the police spawn right in front of me just as I was about to get to the mission point, which prolonged the end of the mission much more than it really should have done. That's kind of a problem with any sort of game, I guess, with police mechanics, but with Driver you have like this felony meter, and if it's up a certain thing, as soon as the police see you, they're on you. Speaking of which as well, sometimes I found it a little bit tricky to know why the police were chasing me. Like, it could have been a speed thing, maybe running a light. Sometimes it felt a bit inconsistent and just a little bit awkward, but it didn't hinder my enjoyment of it too much. It wasn't really a problem. Now, speaking of the police and difficulty, talk about that sort of thing, as I thought, some of the missions did have tight deadlines. Or were the sort of like, if you did not start it perfectly, then it was all over. There's a mission early on where you have to follow a tram. If you don't start perfectly, you lose the tram super easily, even though you might know where it's going, and you fail the mission. But really, any kind of failures in missions were just a matter of evaluating my route and trying it again. The missions themselves didn't really tend to take more than 2 to 3 minutes on average, so it didn't take long to hop back in. And going back to what I said on my initial impressions, if you're playing this via an emulator, you've got save states, so you do want it to start the mission. If you mess up or you know you're going to fail, just reload it back at the start without having to wait for the load times. Pretty instant process, absolutely fine. I'm trying to think what else there was there. Oh yeah, the last mission. The last mission. You've got the weather conditions against you with it. You've got the full police force out against you, and they hit harder than they do in the previous missions. That last mission, absolutely hellish. One hit from one of the police cars can absolutely do you in. You get very little opportunity to recover. I was warned about this mission by other people, but I was not prepared for just how hard it was going to be. So I think if you're playing it, prepare yourself for some big difficulty spikes. But overall, just the general flow of the game, doing the missions, was incredibly fun. As I said it was going to be, the driving was really tight. The variety of missions was there. I never really felt bored doing these missions. It was really fun. They didn't outstay their welcome. They were just paced really well. So it was neat to play for about an hour a night, do a few missions, save it, then start up again the next day, play through some more, and you weren't in a city for too long, so you kind of learnt that city, maybe got a bit fed up with it, moved on to the next one. It's really, really cool. So, we're through the game. What are my final thoughts on it? Generally, the game is a lot of fun. It's uneven at times, but I can really see why so many people revere it. It's aged a lot graphically, and its 4 cities don't really represent their real-world counterparts, but it was cool to see how for each of these 4 cities, Miami, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, that Reflections worked to recreate them with, by being limited by the PlayStation. They each felt unique. They each kind of gave the impression that they were what they were trying to be. Miami felt like Miami, Los Angeles felt like Los Angeles, San Francisco felt like San Francisco, and New York felt like New York. It was just really, really cool, nice to see. Overall, like I say, the game was really, really fun. The size of the maps you have is very impressive. It was cool to learn where to go and, put that into effect each time you played through the mission. Say you failed and tried again. You knew what to try next time round. And like I mentioned, story not much to write home about, but it did its job. It was absolutely fine. And yeah, just a really good game overall. Now, I do think on the release of Drive to San Francisco, the latest game in the franchise, it's shown there was still life in there. And I think there's always going to be room for a cinematic driving game along the lines of something like Driver, something that is purely focused just on you and your cars. You know, we have plenty of racing games out there, and some of them have blended car chase mechanics into it, or stunt mechanics into it. I mean, Reflections themselves did Stuntman, I believe. So I could really see there being room for a game that is just, you are a getaway driver, you have a variety of missions to take on, get from point A to point B, you know, smash vehicle C, escape from police cars, DEFG, that kind of thing. I don't necessarily think we might well see another Driver game, it's very doubtful in that, but I think there's room there to do something with this genre. It doesn't have to be a huge open world experience. You can just do really tight cinematic experiences there, and I think people would really appreciate and love that. So, with all of that said, I would just like to say thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. If you did enjoy it, be sure to check out the other videos in the games I've wanted to play a playlist. I've done Siphon Filter in the past few weeks. Last year we did Dino Crisis, The Bouncer, and Parasite Eve. So go check them out. And of course, on this very video, do leave a like, do leave a comment. Is this a game you remember and review yourself? Is it something you've been inspired to check out yourself? Maybe you were like me, you had the demo as a kid, couldn't get past the parking lot, and now you maybe want to give it another go. Please let me know. I'd really love to hear from you. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more retro gaming content coming soon. Until next time, thank you once again for taking the time to watch this, and goodbye.